Thymeleaf is a modern server-side Java templating engine for both web and standalone environments. Thymeleaf's main goal is to bring natural templates to your development workflow. HTML can be correctly displayed in your browser and also in static prototypes, allowing for better collaboration in teams, specifically if you have a distinct designer and development teams. Thymeleaf has first-class support for Spring Framework, integration with your favorite tools, and is ideal for modern HTML JVM web development. Spring Core team recognized that and recommends Thymeleaf templating engine as a default for Spring web apps. In this session, we'll look at core Thymeleaf features in the context of traditional Spring MVC web apps. Spring's MVC is Spring's framework to build web apps. It follows Model View Controller Design pattern, where it got its name from. MVC pattern is used in many frameworks and languages and can mean slightly different things depending on the implementation. Although there are slight differences in implementation, the underlying problem the pattern tries to solve is always the same. How do you separate concerns for data generation between those for data presentation? In this example, we'd like to present the same data as a web page, an Excel file, and a PDF document. To facilitate this need, MVC pattern introduces a middleman. A middleman that can interpret what kind of output the client needs and is also aware where should it get the data from. In MVC pattern terms, the middleman is called the controller, the data is called the model, and the output the client sees is called the view. In this session, we'll discuss how does Thymeleaf templating engine help us present our data to our web app. In other words, when the output needs to be HTML. To showcase Thymeleaf features, we'll build example web application. We'll need to include obvious web and Thymeleaf dependencies. We'll also include Lombok helper library and Spring Boot DevTools dependency. Since we'll be showcasing small changes in our HTML page, we would need to frequently restart our application, and that would get annoying real quick. Spring Boot DevTools dependency will help us automate the application restart process. Spring Boot DevTools dependency would not work correctly on its own, but also needs a couple of additional things to be set up. We'll go through them next. First, we'll need to add Live Reload web extension to our browser. Live Reload is the automated approach to restarting our application during development. If we start our Spring app with Spring Boot DevTools dependency included, we'll see that Live Reload server is automatically included and started. Web browser client connects to Live Reload server via WebSocket and listens for incoming change notification. When a file in our project is modified, it will be automatically refreshed in the browser without reloading the page. Thymeleaf caches HTML, CSS and JavaScript files by default for performance reasons. So the next thing we'll need to do is disable caching in our local development environment. We'll create application local properties. And we'll disable Thymeleaf caching there. We'll also need to make sure that the local profile is active in our run configuration. Once we do that, we should see and we do that Spring Boot DevTools automatically restarts our application. We do not want automatic restarting in production. That's why we created local profile and local application properties file, which we'll use during development. Additionally, to have automatic restarting enabled, like it was in my case, you'll need to have two settings properly configured in your IntelliJ. One is in Build Execution Deployment Compiler, which is build project automatically, needs to be checked. And the other one is in Advanced Settings. You need to allow automake to start even if develop application is currently running. Once you have these two settings checked, you should be good to go. Let's create our first controller to showcase basic Thymeleaf functionality. We'll call it basic controller. We'll annotate it with add controller and put a get mapping to root. We'll return basic. This will instruct Thymeleaf to search for basic.html in the templates directory, which is configured by default. So we'll need to create HTML file there and call it basic. We'll just put a welcome message for now. If we hit localhost 8080, we should see our welcome message now. To enable live reload, we need to go to our extension part of our browser and enable the extension. If we change our source code, our HTML now, and save it, live reload should kick in and we should see a change in our HTML page. And there it is. Let's first see how we evaluate expressions in Thymeleaf and how to interpolate text. So we'll rename the header to interpolation. In order for Thymeleaf to evaluate expressions, we'll need to use THText attribute. So let's first do a basic arithmetic. 2 plus 2 is... and we'll make Thymeleaf evaluate the expression by using THText, $curly braces, and put a dynamic expression in there. We'll need to import the Thymeleaf namespace. We'll save it. We should see a change in our browser. There we go, 2 plus 2 is 4. You can combine static text and dynamic expression by using the pipe symbol. So if we'll do text equals pipe, 2 plus 3 is, and then the dynamic expression. If we save, the 2 plus 3 is static text and the 5 is calculated dynamically. Font on our page is a bit small, so we'll enlarge the viewport so we can see better. Let's see how we pass dynamic values from our controller to our view. We'll need to use a model for that. And make sure you import the right class, Org Spring Framework UI model. Model has add attribute methods with two signatures. One where we pass the attribute name and the other one where we just pass the value. So let's use the first one where we'll pass some hard-coded string. Welcome to Thymeleaf. When we don't specify an attribute name, Thymeleaf will default to a class name of the object that's being passed in this case string with a lowercase string. We can reference our message in our template by using THText as before. And we'll reference it by using attribute name of lowercase string. We'll notice that this isn't the most user-friendly way to name our attributes, so I wouldn't recommend this approach. Instead, I'd recommend you always use the second method signature that gives explicit name to our attributes. So let's do that instead. We'll create a message variable and we'll give it an attribute name of message. And in our HTML, we'll reference it by using the appropriate attribute name. There's no difference in our HTML because we reference the same string. Alternative way to reference a message is by not using the THText attribute, but by referencing a message directly inside an HTML tag by using square brackets. And we see we get the same result. If we copy our HTML and use HTML validation service, we'll see that there are errors and the THText attribute is not a valid HTML. Thymeleaf prides itself to being a natural templating engine, meaning it should work correctly in static and dynamic environments, and we'll see an example of that later on. The fact that TH attributes are not valid static HTML does not sit well with me. It goes against what Thymeleaf claims to be. And although all examples on official Thymeleaf website use this th: syntax, There's an alternative that I prefer that is valid HTML. Alternative is to use data HTML attributes, which are valid HTML. So let's replace th colon text with data th text. And we'll notice we no longer need the Thymeleaf namespace, so we can get rid of that. If we copy the HTML and try to validate it now, we'll get valid HTML. Nice. We'll use data th attribute instead of th colon from now on. And just know if you see example with th colon, the replacement is simple as we showcased in our example. Let's see how we use conditionals next. We'll add another div. And we'll go to our basic controller and add a random integer between 0 and 10. So we'll do random integer to 10. Bounded to 10. And we'll add it to our model. And for now, we'll just reference it in our HTML page. So random was 6. If we refresh our page, we'll see we'll get a different random each time. We'd like to display a message if random was less than 5, let's say. And in order to do that, we need to use data thif attribute. In there, we need to pass a Boolean expression that will evaluate the true or false and will determine whether the HTML tag will be displayed. In this case, into 10 less or equal to 5, we'll say random was less than 5. Thymeleaf doesn't have else attribute, but you can achieve a similar thing by using unless. And we'll say random was greater than 5. So we can refresh our page a couple of times. Random is 8, so it was greater than 5. Random is 4, so it was less than 5. We see that certain paragraph is being displayed depending on the value of the Boolean expression in data th if and in data th unless. In case you were wondering, we included equals in our Boolean expression because random starts with 0. Let's look at iterations next. For that, we'll create a list in our basic controller. So list of strings grades. Let's add our grades to the model. And we can iterate over a list by using data th each attribute. So we'll create an unordered list and we'll use data th each grade in grades, and we'll need to display it. Let's wait a second for our page to refresh. And there are our grades. Let's explain what's going on. For each member of our list, Thymeleaf will generate a list item HTML tag and populate the value from our list into the grade variable. It will then reference this variable to display the text in the list item. You may be wondering how is it possible to have two Thymeleaf tags on a one HTML tag, and that's because of the precedence. First, the data th attribute is being run and list items being created, and then the values of the text is being populated. Thymeleaf contains expression utility objects for working with strings, booleans, arrays, as well as the lists. We can use those utility objects to make our life easier. So let's use one. Again, we'll use data th text, and we'll use the utility object lists to display the size of our own list of grades. And we'll wait for the refresh to kick in, and there it is. Currently have 4 grades. Thymeleaf has the possibility to filter lists in HTML, so let's use that to find out how many grades we have that start with letter A. You filter a list by using dot question mark syntax, and then in square brackets you provide a filter. And to reference the current member of the list, we'll use this syntax, and then we can use the function of a strings object. Starts with letter A. And there we have it. Currently we have 3 grades that start with A: Ada, Albert, and Aristotle. Let's just temporarily comment the conditionals and interpolation so we have more room to work with. Let's look at another example of expression utility objects, this time for numbers. We want to display days of the week, and we'll use numbers sequence method to generate custom range from 1 to 7. Let's switch back to our application and use numbers utility object. So we need to use again data th each. We'll display day in numbers sequence, and it will be a sequence from 1 to 7. For text, we'll just display day. And there we have it. Maybe we would like to display day's name instead of number. We could do that by using Java's day of week class. And this will give us the opportunity to showcase how to reference static methods in Thymeleaf. Let's first expand our IDE, and day of week is Java's time day of week class. And to reference the class, we need to use syntax T. So Java's time day of week, and we'll use its static method of, and we'll give the day of the number sequence. And once our application refreshes, we should see days names instead of numbers. To recap, to reference a type, T for type, and then fully qualified name. This is especially useful if you have custom enums for, let's say, value of static method. Let's talk about objects next. So we'll comment the iteration part, and we'll create another div with h2 for objects. And let's return to our basic controller, and we'll create a record post. It will have author, created on, and content. And we'll create a new post and add it to our model. So it needs to have an author, We could reference our post object in our HTML template by completely displaying it. So with data th text. We could also display just a single attribute. So post author, let's say. But we could also bind post to a div element with data th object. And then inside this div reference its attributes by using asterisks. So let's reference post content, so not dollar but asterisks. And we see that the post is displayed. Firstly, the whole post, the whole object, then just the author by using the dot syntax, and then thirdly, we bind the post to this div, and inside div, we reference its attributes by using the asterisk syntax. The asterisk syntax is especially useful when working with forms, because forms will usually have multiple fields and we'll bind it to an object. Let's talk about forms next. First, we'll uncomment these divs, because I think we've nearly finished with our basic examples. To talk about forms, we'll create another controller, forms controller, let's call it. In our basic controller, we've used get mapping. And if we have a look at what get mapping is, it's a request mapping with methods set to get. It also has a target to a method only. If we have a look at the request mapping, we'll notice it has target to type as well as the method. So we could use request mapping on the class level. If we specify request mapping on the class level, all the methods in the controller will inherit the root URL specified in request mapping. So forms. Get mapping will now start with forms. So string show form. It will return forms, HTML that we need to create. We'll just say h1 forms. Now that we have two HTML pages, let's talk about how do we navigate between them. Let's return to our basic HTML, and we'd like to have anchor tags to help us navigate between pages. So we'll have an unordered list with two list items and anchor in them. Let the first one be to slash basic and the second one will be to forms. Let's try to show our forms page, and it works. Let's return back. Our basic page also works. Although href attribute seems to be working, it's only because our app is deployed and referenced in the root of our localhost server. If it would be deployed as var in servlet container, it would have an application name prefix. In that case, our /forms would try to hit non-existing URL on root of server, instead of correct URL our app name /forms. To address this issue, Thymeleaf offers href attribute that recognizes the context in which application runs and adds necessary prefix to links if required. Let's use Thymeleaf data href syntax, and one additional change we need to make: instead of normal slash, we'll need to use @ syntax. This is the special Thymeleaf syntax to signify we are dealing with URLs. And the same thing for forms. So at forms. We have a decent sized page right now, so before we continue talking about forms, let's quickly return to the topic of natural templates. To remind ourselves, natural templates in Thymeleaf lingo are just HTML files where the basic structure is still normal HTML tags, but where the dynamic behavior is defined by Thymeleaf attributes. Where this becomes interesting is if you have a collaboration between two teams, a development and a designer team. Once you have the structure of your web page defined, you would like to give it to your designer team for styling. We'll simulate this by opening our web page in Microsoft Visual Studio Code and trying to see how the web page looks without Thymeleaf engine processing. Visual Studio Code also has support for live server, and we can open our page with live server to see how does it look as static HTML. We'll notice that, as in case of our list, static page does not have list data, so HTML tags have been left out. In case of our message interpolation string, Thymeleaf instruction has been left unprocessed. Our development team should know the basic shape of data, and Thymeleaf offers features to express that to our designer team. Let's return to our Spring app and see what Thymeleaf features can be used to help our designer team. We've noticed that data.th text attributes could not be processed by the static HTML page. Instead, page is left with empty tags. We can alleviate that by providing default values. We can place some dummy text in HTML tags that have data.th text attribute. It will be displayed in the case of static page and replaced by Thymeleaf in the case of our dynamic pages. So let's put 4 in here, 5 in here. For message we'll say welcome. For our random number we'll say 7. For our list size we'll say 4. And for our list size of grades that begin with letter A, we'll say 2, let's say. We've also noticed that in the case of our list, since static page doesn't have any list items, it displays empty list item tag. We can provide default value in there as well. And for our days of the week, Monday. Another thing we can do with list is provide hard-coded list items and use Thymeleaf data.th remove attribute to remove all but first list items. The purpose of data.th remove attribute with the value all but first is for Thymeleaf to leave only the first list item when it dynamically processes the page, but in the case of static pages, both hard-coded list items will be left alone, and it will give more data for our designers to work with. Data.th remove also has other values besides all but first, like tag and all, and we'll have a look at example later on. Let's return to our designer view of our HTML page, and now we see it looks more populated. It has default values as well as the 3 list items. Our designer team can now provide basic styling for our application. Let's assume they've decided to go with Fomantic UI CSS framework that has a rich set of components that we can use to make our application look better. Let's go to Getting Started section to include required JavaScript and CSS files the framework needs. And we see our page updates with a new look. I've chosen Fomantic UI, which is a fork of Semantic UI CSS framework, because it has self-describing semantic class names, and everyone should be able to understand what's the purpose of them just based on their names. Let's provide basic styling for our application. Fomantic UI classes, most of them start with UI. For our main div, we'll say we want a padded container segment. For our unordered list of links, we want to style them as menu, so we'll go with secondary pointing menu, and we'll also mark list items in the list as item. And that gives us our basic styling. We can also style our list. We can say that it's divided list, and items in there will be item. It looks better now. We'll get back to our Java application to continue discussing Thymeleaf features related to forms. But in the meantime, we see that changes made by the design team are correctly reflected in our Java app as well. Before we continue discussing about Thymeleaf features related to forms, we'll notice we have two web pages now, and we'd like to share commonalities between them, like top menu, scripts and CSS files, and general structure of the page. To help us reuse snippets of HTML, Thymeleaf has a concept of fragments. They are very similar to methods. Just as you use methods to better structure your Java code, you use fragments to better structure your HTML pages. Let's create a fragment for our menu first. In our templates directory, we'll create subdirectory for fragments, and we'll create a new HTML page for menu. And we don't need the whole structure. We'll just copy the div for our main menu, and we'll call this HTML snippet as a fragment with the name of main menu. We can include our fragment in another page by referencing it. So let's go to our basic HTML, and we'll delete the menu, and we'll create a new div, and instead we'll say replace content of this div with the content of the newly created fragment. And we reference a fragment by saying tilde and then give it a path to fragment HTML, which is fragments/menu, and double dots, and the fragment name, it was main menu. You can include a fragment in another page by using data-th-replace, which will completely replace this div with the content of the fragment, or by using data-th-insert, which will insert the content of the fragment into this div. Div will remain on the page as a parent div. Let's try to copy our menu into our second page, forms HTML. And when the page refreshes, if we try to go to forms page, we see our menu is there, but it's not stylized. That's because our forms HTML page does not contain semantic UI, CSS and JavaScript files. Let's create skeleton for our application. We'll go back to our basic HTML and we'll use this file as a reference. And next we'll create a new fragment, call it skeleton. And we'll just copy our basic HTML. We don't need the content of the file, well, we'll just keep the general structure. So in this file we'll have our scripts and our CSS files, and we'll name this as layout fragment. Let's just put in the missing div so our HTML page is valid. We already saw in our main menu example how fragments enable us to share HTML snippets, but we also discussed that they are similar to Java methods. This is reflected in the fact that fragments can take parameters just as Java methods can. In our layout fragment we might need parameter to show user which menu is active, as well as the parameter for content that we'd like to insert below the main menu. Let's create parameters for our layout fragment. We'll need active menu, parameter and content. We'll insert the content in our div below our main menu. So we'll use data thinsert. And we'll reference the content just as we do our normal model attributes. We need to pass our active menu to our main menu fragment. So we'll use $curly braces and reference it. We don't have active menu parameter in our main menu fragment, so we'll add it there. Fomantic UI enables us to style active menu by appending an active class to an item. We want to change active list item based on the value passed in the parameter active menu. So if in active menu parameter, let's say value basic is passed, then this list item should be active. And if value forms is passed, then this list item should be active. To change the class based on some condition, Thymeleaf offers classappend feature. So let's use it. Classappend is in essence a ternary expression. It consists of three parts. The first part, we'll need to put a condition there. So we'll say if active menu equals to basic, then we'll append the class of active. Otherwise, we'll just append an empty class. Similarly, for our other list item, we'll just copy classappend from our previous list item and replace basic with forms. Let's include our layout fragment in our skeleton HTML in our basic HTML page. And we'll replace the whole HTML, so data th replace, with a fragment. We'll reference the fragment by using tilde curly braces, and the fragment location is in fragments, skeleton, that's the name of the HTML file, and the name of the fragment is layout. We need to provide two parameters. For our active menu, we'll say basic, and for our content, we'll just leave it there, discuss it shortly. Somehow we need to include this whole HTML as the second parameter to our layout fragment. The script and CSS we no longer need. It's contained in the layout and the menu as well. We'll say that the main div has the ID of content, let's say basic content. And it includes the whole basic HTML page content. We can reference the basic ID div as a parameter to our fragment, again by using tilde, curly braces, and because it's in current file, we don't need to specify the file location, so just double dots. And we reference the ID the same way we reference the ID in CSS, by using hash. Let's recap what's going on. This whole block of HTML code we referenced and passed in as the second parameter to our fragment. Our fragment will then take it and display it in its own div, inserted below our main menu. Our active menu we've set up to basic and passed it as a parameter to our main menu fragment. Our main menu fragment will see that the active menu is basic and will activate the first list item. We can do a similar thing with forms HTML. So we'll just take all this segment and replace it. This time it won't be basic menu, but forms menu, and our div will let's call it fragments just to see how this is done. That it doesn't have to be ID. So this will be content fragment. And again, we'll reference the fragment like so. We don't need the forms title. And if we refresh our forms HTML, we see we have plain menu because our content is empty. And we see our active menu is forms. If we click the basic menu, we are taken to the basic page and the active menu is basic. And we can switch back and forth. Cool. Let's create another fragment for our JavaScript and CSS files. So we'll call it CSS.js HTML. And we'll just surround it with a div tag. And this will be include files fragment. Include header files, let's say. How do we deal with the fact that we want to include this JavaScript and CSS files in our header, but they are wrapped in a div tag which is not a valid HTML tag for header? We'll use Thymeleaf feature that we've already used before, and that's data th remove. This time with the value of tag. This will remove the outer div when we reference the fragment and will only leave the inner content. Let's reference our new fragment in our skeleton, in our layout. So we'll go to skeleton HTML and we'll replace the div with the content of the CSS.js fragment. So it's in fragments, CSS.js, and the fragment name is include header files. And we should be set. There should be no change in our application. Let's just restart manually to see. And if we refresh, everything works. We can now continue working on our form. So let's go to forms HTML and we'll create a basic form there. We'll use Semantic UI form class. For action, we'll leave that blank for now and we'll just place a submit button. With the value submit. We don't need the input. And let's get back to our form attributes. Method needs to be post. And for action, anytime we have a URL in our application, we discussed that we need to use special Thymeleaf at notation that will properly delegate to correct URL. So instead of normal action, we'll use data th action and we'll post to forms. So we need to create our post method in our forms controller. We only have get mapping for now. So we'll do post mapping and we'll call it submit form. We'll return redirect to forms. Let's explain what's going on. String return in get mapping maps to HTML with the same name in templates directory. Special redirect syntax will trigger control method map to redirect URL. In our case, show form will be called again. and as a result, forms HTML will be displayed. We'll put our business logic before redirect for our post method to do something useful. Let's go to our forms HTML and fix the look of our submit button. We'll place class of UI button in there. And our page is at 200%. I don't think it's no longer necessary, so we'll just return it to maybe 150. And our button looks better now. Our form submit already works, but since we don't have any input values, the only thing it does is it redirects back to itself. We could create simple named inputs and submit that to our controller post method. But a better option and a more advanced one is to create a backing object. Let's create the backing message form object. We will go to our forms controller and create a record. Call it message form. It will have string message as an attribute. And we'll place the instance of the message form in our get mapping show form method by using model attribute message form. And the same message form will be posted to our submit form. So we'll receive it as a parameter. Let's also add log4j log annotation so we can log the value of the submitted form. We'll log the message form. We see our new input for message displayed on our form, and if we input some dummy values and submit it, we'll see in our logs that value is correctly submitted. We'd like to add validations to our form. Up to version of Spring of 2.3, validations were included by default, but in our case we need to add them explicitly. So let's just stop our application and go to POM.xml and add validation dependency. Let's reload our project. Let's go back to our forms controller and we'll include a couple of validations on our message. Let's say not blank, and also size that has to be minimum of 3 characters. To enable the validations, we need to say on our submit form that this should be a valid message form. Let's start our application again and try to submit an empty value and see what do we get this time. So let's go to our form, try to submit, and we see our validations working. We get the not blank message as well as the size message. It has to be between 3 and some large number. This large number, by the way, is integer's max value. Providing white label error page when the user submits invalid form is not exactly user-friendly. Instead, we'd like to leave the user on the form and give feedback on what went wrong and a chance to correct it. Since we annotated our message form with addValid annotation, we can receive error messages in our code as well in our submit form method. We can get a hold of the errors by including errors parameter in our submit form method. Spring Framework validation errors. So we'll import a class, and if we have any errors, then we'll return the user to the form. So instead of returning redirect, we'll return forms index.html. Let's get back to our form and try to submit an empty value this time. And we've got the correct behavior. We didn't get the white label error page, but the user does not have any feedback as to what happened with the form. Let's work on our HTML form to display errors to our users. So we'll go to our forms HTML, and first thing we need to do is engulf our inputs into tag to be able to style it. We'll use the div tag and we give it a class of field. This is semantic UI class. The same thing for our submit button. Next, we need to append error class to our UI form in case we have any errors. And we know if we have any errors by using Thymeleaf's fields companion object. So we've done that already. We'll use data.th classappend, and in the case we have any errors, which we'll know by using fields, has any errors method. If we have any errors, we'll append a class of error, and otherwise just an empty class. We'd also like to append error class to our message field in case it has any errors. So we'll do a similar thing. We'll class append error, and to find out if a message field has errors, we'll use has errors and pass in the message as a parameter. Let's try to submit an empty form now. And we see field becomes red, signifying something went wrong, which is a step up. But we'd also like to tell the user what the issue was. We'll display an error message underneath the input field. So if we have any errors, which we'll find out by using data.th, and we'll copy the fields has error message, which we used in classappend. In this case, we'd like to display an error message, and Thymeleaf offers errors syntax to display an error message for appropriate field. And we can get a hold of the message by using asterisk and then a field name. So message in this case. And there's an error in data.th. This should be all engulfed in $curly braces to work properly. To style our message, we'll add semantic UI class of UI basic red pointing prompt label. Let's add a segment class to our form as well. Format everything. I think this should be enough for our new form to be complete. Let's just restart an application and test it out. And nice, we get an error message underneath our field. We can customize our size error message by going to our forms controller and providing a message parameter in our add size annotation. Instead of providing hard-coded message, we can externalize it in the message properties file. This would also give us the ability to translate our messages to different languages. To reference external messages in message properties file, you use the curly braces syntax. We'll name our message as forms message size. We'll copy that and go to our resources and create messages properties file and put our message label there and say something. We'll see what in a minute. Let's find out how the default message of size must be between 3 and integer max value is displayed. If we go to validation messages properties, we'll see that the size message is size must be between min and max. And notice the 3 is not hard-coded. Instead, it's referenced by using curly braces min syntax. We'll use the same syntax in our message properties. So we'll say must be a min of min characters. If we try to submit our form now, we see our custom must be a min of 3 characters message. Let's translate our message in German. For that we need another message properties file with the appropriate language. In this case, DE for Deutsch. So we'll create messages DE properties and place our German message in there. Let's change the language of our browser in our settings. Let's switch it to German, to Deutsch. And if we go back to our form and submit it, we get our German message. Mindestens 3 Zeichen. I love to shout on my users in German. Also notice that the validations framework already comes in with the German translation for must not be blank message. Darf nicht leer sein. Let's see how we can reference messages in Thymeleaf. And let's translate, let's say, this tab, forms. So we'll put a German translation, Formen, and our English title will be forms. If we go to our menu, HTML, which contains forms, instead of containing this hard-coded text, we'll reference message and this time we need to reference it with hash. What was the message? Message was title forms. And if we refresh now, we see our Formen, our message in German, Formen. Let's switch back to English. And if we refresh, sure we can descend, we see our English messages. We've handled a situation where form submission is invalid, but we'd also like to let the user know when things go well. Let's get back to our forms controller, to our submit form. Springs offers special redirect attributes object that we can use on redirects to set up flash attributes. Attributes that are only valid for one HTTP call. So we'll use redirect attributes, and after the form submission has been valid, we'll set flash attribute toast message. To display our message, we'll use Fomantic UI toast feature. It's a way to display short-lived message in a pop-up. Let's copy the code to run the toast and we'll use it later in our application. In our application, we'll go to layout fragment in skeleton HTML and place the code for toast there, because this fragment is being used by all other HTML pages and we want the ability to show toast messages from any page in our application. Toast needs to be placed in the script tag, and we'll display the script tag only if we have a toast message. So we'll use data.thif. And for now we'll just paste in the toast code. That should be enough if we submit valid value over 3 characters. And there we have it, we got a toast. To pass the value of our toast message to JavaScript, we'll need to use special Thymeleaf syntax that will enable it to inline values. So we'll use inline for JavaScript. And we'll define MSG variable. For now we'll set it to empty string. And we'll discuss next how to pass the value in. Thymeleaf knows how to inline a variable in JavaScript by using comments and then interpolation string we saw before. So double square brackets and then inside value of variable we want to pass. This time toast message. And we'll use this MSG variable to place our message in the toast message. If we now submit a valid value, we get our success message. That's the message we've set up in our forms controller. There we have it. This concludes our look at Thymeleaf templating engine, and I hope you now see why Spring Team decided to make a default choice for server-side web apps. Its natural templates, collaboration features, and deep integration with Spring Framework honestly made it an easy choice. Till next time, happy coding!